Hello, everyone, and welcome to our continued series of Designing for Empathy Summit workshops. This is the third in our series, and we are delighted to have you joining us today. Obviously, we'll be hearing from Anne Fullenkamp to talk about exciting and playful ways to talk about love and forgiveness, and I will introduce Anne in just a moment. But for now, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Greg Stevens, and I am delighted to be here as a co-host for the second time for the Design for Empathy Summit and workshops, having worked with Elif, my colleague and friend, on last year's summit, and so pleased to be here. Elif, thank you for having me back.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to Anne for leading this workshop, and I also would like to acknowledge the generous sponsorship of the Pittsburgh Children's Museum, the Museum of Us, and the Seattle Aquarium, and all the individual support from the individuals, some of them from this audience. So I really appreciate it. So your contributions is making this event possible. So I'm so grateful.
Absolutely, and thank you, Elif. Before we get started officially, it is important for us to offer land acknowledgements to recognize the ancestral peoples in the various places we are. I happen to be in New York City, and New York City resides on the land, the ancestral homelands of the Lenape people, and we recognize the significance of these lands to these people, past and present. And Elif, I know that you are in Washington, D.C., which happens to be the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway and Anacostan people. And we also recognize these people as the stewards of these regions for generations. And Anne, you're in Pittsburgh right now at the Pittsburgh Children's Museum. And the Pittsburgh city itself resides on the ancestral lands of the Adena, Hopewell, and Monongahela cultures, as well as refugees of other tribes who were removed in other regions through colonial practice. So we honor these traditional native inhabitants of all of these locations where we are calling in from, and hope that you also, wherever you are calling in from, recognize the ancestral lands of these peoples. So thank you very much for allowing me that moment of acknowledgement. Elif, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a more formal welcome to the summit and help remind our colleagues of why we're even doing all of this.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for the land acknowledgements on both of our behalf and our colleagues here. So I would like to welcome you again to the summit and the workshops. This is very exciting. And those of you who have been in the other workshops in the past few days have heard me reading this or sharing with you this brief remarks about what is designing for empathy, why are we doing this, what is a designing for empathy workshop. And I was thinking, it's going to be like difficult to do that like at every workshop, but because these are recorded, I just want them to be included as context for those who may be just watching this one particular workshop. And also in my tradition, in Turkey, we say that if you repeat something that you want 40 times, it happens. So I'm really on my way, at least I will have done this at least 10 or 11 times throughout the workshop. So I think we're in a good, good setting here. So before I introduce Anne, I would like to share with you our intentions about holding these events, designing for empathy workshops and summits, and what they are and why we are doing this. Our main goal with the designing for empathy workshops and summits is to create a platform where individuals from different backgrounds, disciplines, and sectors can come together to develop solutions to the empathy deficit in our world. We believe that our ability to develop individuals' capacity for empathy towards the oneness of all beings, all of humanity, the environment, and the planet, lies at the heart of our ability to solve our most complex problems. The challenges we face today, from social injustice to climate change, are not because we lack the intellectual capacity, technologies, or the resources to tackle them, but it is because caring for others as much as we care for ourselves, as if that other could be me, which makes us want to take action to solve another's suffering or problem, requires a major perspective shift. This is where we stop seeing ourselves as the centers of the universe and start recognizing that we are all interconnected parts of something much greater than ourselves. This pragmatic perspective shift can only be achieved through a lived experience. And empathy, our ability to imagine the world through another's perspective, provides the foundation. To me, something extraordinary happens when we empathize. Because of our inherent ability to empathize, I believe that our ego, which always puts I, me, myself in the front and center, gets distracted momentarily, while our true self, which is deeply rooted in our heart in the qualities of compassion and love, takes the helm of our attention and channels it and immerses it in another's perspective. This is not always easy because it requires us to look at the world in a whole new way. Instead of placing ourselves in the center of the universe, we realize that we are, and as a matter of fact, each being in the circle of oneness is unique and an essential component of our existence. This pragmatic perspective shift can only happen through an experience, and that's where designing for empathy comes in. We believe that because empathy can be best learned through lived experiences, creating those authentic experiences where individuals can discover, unlock, and advance their potential for empathy in safe and non-judgmental spaces become more essential. Designing empathy workshops are here to provide a platform for a diverse group of individuals to come together and experiment with the creation of these perspective shifting experiences that lead to a spark of empathy on a long journey towards the realization of our oneness and oneness of all beings. With that, I would like to welcome Anne Fullenkamp from Pittsburgh Children's Museum, whom I've had the privilege of collaborating several times, most recently at our very first online and public workshop series hosted by the Chautauqua Institution. That's where I was introduced to this. I'm sure this will be a slightly different one, but this exercise. And I already started, I printed my puzzle and started cutting them out. So I'm really looking forward to this engaging experience. And would you like to take take a moment to please introduce yourself and lead us into the workshop? Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Elif and Greg, for organizing this again. Really excited to be here with everybody. And I love this group here because I think what I'd like to do today is experiment. I'll start with talking about an exhibit we've designed and we've worked with the Children's Museum for many years, Xoxo, an exhibit about love and forgiveness. And then we'll spend the second half of the time playing with this, an activity that came out of that exhibit. But before we get to the presentation, I'll just give quick background on myself. My name is Anne Fullenkamp. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Senior Director of Creative Experiences. I pause because we've had title change since during the pandemic, but that's a great title. I oversee a lot of the creative experiences here at the Children's Museum, but at the core, I'm the exhibits person and I oversee our exhibits department. And I've been at the museum now, next week will be my 15th anniversary, which 15 years here, which for me is very surprising because I came here as a temporary 9-month position as an architect to design one traveling exhibit. And that I have to proud to say that traveling exhibit is still traveling. After it was supposed to travel for 3 years, I was only supposed to be here for 9 months, but everything's still going on. So I've really found an amazing place here for me at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. I know we talked a lot about, some of you are familiar with us, but I want to put a little context what we're really focusing on right now at the Children's Museum and how this exhibit Xoxo was the start of it is we're really kind of going really deep into social emotional learning It was always something we were interested in and started with this exhibit in 2014, but it was really kind of, the pandemic has made us focus more and commit to this idea of empathy, kindness, and really what our role as a children's museum is. We were closed for 15 months. We closed in March of 2020, and we reopened in limited capacity in June of 21. We're still in limited capacity. We're open 4 days a week now. And we still, our total attendance, we're keeping it at 30% of what we were in the past. And we're really hoping 2022 is the build back year. But we're taking slow steps. And as part of that too, is we're really rethinking what it means to be a children's museum, to be a community resource, to be a community partner. And it really comes back to some of these ideas in Xoxo that we're building off on. So I know a lot of you are familiar with us, so I wanted to put it into that context a little bit. So I am going to begin sharing my screen, and I will start, we'll go into what this exhibit Xoxo, Love and Forgiveness is, and then actually, let me see. Are you all unfortunately seeing that bar right in the middle of the screen? Let me see this. Can you confirm or
All
deny
good,
that?
Anne. Anne,
Okay.
you're all good.
No bar.
All right. So, like I said, we will start with an introduction to Xoxo, the traveling exhibit, and I'll walk us through that. Then I will introduce us to the activity that we'll do as a group, hopefully, our story puzzle. And that's one of the interactive exhibits that we have, components that we have in the exhibit. Then we've also been experimenting with how to use that idea and that format in different ways. And so I'm looking forward to working with this group on new ways to think about this exhibit idea. So we'll take a break where everyone can kind of work on their puzzles, and then we'll reconvene, share the puzzles, go through some experiments with how to use the puzzle, and hopefully have a really great discussion. Okay, so a little introduction again to the Children's Museum. Our mission is to provide innovative museum experiences that inspire kindness, joy, creativity, and curiosity. And I'm highlighting kindness because this is something that was added to our mission statement during the pandemic. We made it official, I think, in May of 2021. And again, a lot of this has been work that children's museums, and lots of organizations that are working with children are talking more and more about. But we added it to our mission statement because this is really going to be our focus moving forward. So from a design perspective, we're a very hands-on museum that has never changed and probably will never change because, Elif would mention authenticity as being core to empathy. And for us too, that authenticity relates to real stuff and real things, and making sure that there are tangible objects that people, kids, families can recognize in their everyday world that can be playful, that they can relate to. So all of our design philosophy really comes down to real stuff and real world experiences. We use real tools, real materials, real processes. And the real focus for us from a design standpoint and the practical part is how do you make things that are durable, responsive, that goes to a sustainability aspect too, that there's financial sustainability to a lot of our decisions too, that we don't need very, very expensive things to create playful and creative experiences that that families can enjoy. So we took all that kind of background when we started working on the exhibit Xoxo, an exhibit about love and forgiveness. So we were approached by a private foundation, the Fetzer Institute out of Michigan in 2013. And their challenge to us was to design an exhibit about love and forgiveness. And that was it. And as you all can imagine, that was it's a very daunting task, especially when the focus was for kids and make it traveling. And, so where do you begin with love and forgiveness? So what we ended up doing is kind of distill, after many, many discussions, we distilled it down to these 3 goals. We wanted to encourage meaningful experiences and conversations about love and forgiveness. For us, we understood that love and forgiveness is a vast topic that you can take a lifetime to study or even understand. So we just really wanted to create experiences that would begin conversations. We also wanted to gain insight into the various ways people express feelings. So again, understanding that our audience is very young, families coming to a museum, not necessarily expecting to have any specific experience. They just are coming to play, that we wanted to make sure that there were many ways to enter the exhibit and be able to participate. And then again, especially since we focus on very young children, we wanted visitors to be aware that they control how they choose to respond to those feelings. And it's interesting when we talk about interactive exhibits and experiences for children, that early childhood, 3, 4, and 5, that's where we're really talking about being able to regulate and learn to control your emotions and manage your emotions. But it's a lesson that adults need reminding too. So we always find, and it's so fascinating to see how much adults can benefit. And then they appreciate these reminders and these simple lessons that are on the surface might be designed for children, but it's really a good check-in, reboot, refresh for adults too. And for adults who are new parents to have that retraining, because there's a lot of anxiety sometimes with parents in having to teach and impart these ideas for their kids. So that's the other thing here, that we obviously design for children, but we're really thinking about people of all ages when we design our experiences. So Xoxo relies on audience participation for the content. This was kind of a risky moment for us as we were developing the exhibit. We really started to realize that the more we designed the activities, the more narrow and prescriptive the experience was. So as the exhibit got more and more detailed, the activities actually became more and more broad and less exhibit-like, and there was less prescriptive content, which again this is hindsight, looking back 6 and 7 years now, is kind of, it still happens. Like the more we pulled away, the better the experience became. So, so how do you do this? How do you step away from an exhibit from a prescriptive direction, instruction point of view, and still get a good result, knowing that you have these end goals? And how do you even guarantee, will anyone, you can build it, but will they participate? If you're relying on the visitor and children and families to actively participate and actually contribute and create the content of the exhibit they're going to, how do you know they'll do it? So to kind of, to guarantee that you have to do something to generate the content that we needed and we wanted, and to the experiences that we wanted to foster, we went with communication. So people communicate with their voices, we communicate with our faces, and we communicate through writing or drawing or making marks on pages. And that was that common language that we knew that all from infants to 0 to 80, 0 to 100, everyone communicates in some way. So again, these are more examples of our voice, writing, and faces. So, but speaking to that, as we were developing this, we got a lot of pushback or challenges, but your audience can't write or they can't talk yet. So how do you get adults to engage with these activities designed for the younger kids? So that's the other part of this Xoxo exhibit. And when we start thinking about empathy and designing for empathy and talking about these really, really big topics, we want the parents or the adults or the caregivers to engage with the children and be active participants, because that's one of the things we found, that when a child and their adult are participating together, it's more meaningful for both, but the children really get engaged when they see their adults participating with them side by side, rather than stepping back and be the observer. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of these interactive experiences. So we did something called silhouettes, where this is communicating with your faces. So on the surface, you sit down, and it's a exhibit that was designed so two people could draw each other's silhouette. One person is the subject, and the other person is the artist, the drawer. So on one level, it's just a simple drawing activity, but what this was really about was getting two people to sit quietly together and really look at each other. And that's what was kind of amazing about this. What this ended up being about is we have a display wall where you can take your drawn silhouette and post it on the wall, and all that kind of the basic activity of drawing that you might see in an art studio or an exhibit about something else. But what actually happened were people were starting to have these conversations. And, it's even directions with a parent asking the child to sit still, or, two children, saying, taking turns and having those communications. But it was also really about just looking at each other's faces and spending that quiet time together, because the end product really wasn't the focus here at all. So then another interactive was focused on our voices, and it's called tone phones. So in this one, we had a telephone, an old-fashioned telephone set, handset that most people told us kids don't understand that, they won't know what to do with it. But that was okay, because actually it was the novelty of what this was, and there are symbols, and most everyone understood what that telephone handset was. But when you pick up the telephone, you could make any kind of noise into it. You could say a word, or you could blow into it, or vocalize some way, and your voice would be projected onto a screen. And the idea was that if you used a soft, sweet tone of voice, a smooth, pretty wave would be projected. On the other hand, if you used a loud, harsh tone of voice, the image would be very jagged. So it started to put a visualization to how you sound, and introduce that idea of the tone of your voice. So it's not just what you say and the words you use, but it's also the intonation in your voice and how you say it. And again, this was a fun activity. Once people figured it out, there were very few instructions, but once they saw what was happening, they began to play and understand the regulation in their voices. And then they began to talk about different ways, like when you use your loud voice, how that sounds. Makes you sound angry? And it began going down that line versus the sweet, soft tones. And we found that there were conversations between adults and children recalling past experiences. Oh, when you were sick, we talk softly, or, we kind of, when we're trying to be nice, we talk this way. And, it was really wonderful to see those kind of conversations. The other things that also happened, which was really amazing, were we had people who were hard of hearing or were deaf, who came to the exhibit and vocalized into the handsets and began to see their voices for the first time. So that also got us to thinking about how we can present interactive experiences that cross media and have multisensory experiences, and not presume that one kind of, that the activity will take a path in a linear way, that just because somebody can't necessarily participate in experience it the same way as everyone else, it doesn't mean that there isn't a way to interact and participate in this experience. So that was really eye-opening too, when we thought about using sound and visualization in different ways. So another activity we did was called the quote mirrors. So this was communicating with words and with faces. So what we did is we had a lot of mirrors in the exhibit. We used that as motif of reflection, and frankly, a little bit of a gimmick, because we know that people, kids, but also adults, cannot resist looking at themselves in the mirror. I do have to say, when we did this in 2014, it was before Instagram and cell phones really blew up. It was just must have been on that cusp of all the social media and all that stuff. So it really was, for us, when we conceived of this, is these moments in the exhibit where we wanted people to take a moment, stop, but then we put words and quotes and things of inspiration we wanted them to read on the mirror rather than on a sign, a regular signboard that you might see, because especially at our museum, we people don't read signs. There's, we're not that kind of museum, and we found that when we put signs, people would walk by. So we're like, well, what if we put it on a mirror? They'll stop and look at themselves. So we found that to be really successful. And over the years, you can see that once Instagram kind of took off, these became those moments. And then we also did it in a different way where the mirrors were interactive. So these are actually, we created these mirrors that are two-way mirrors. So you're essentially turning on a switch. So when you approach the mirror, you cannot see the words. And then when you touch these paddles, you put your hands on the hand paddles, you're completing a circuit, and then a light comes on, and then the words are revealed to you. So again, thinking about kids, families, introducing these things and intersecting some playful moments, figuring that out, and then again, a new way to convey a message. And frankly, for us at a children's museum, and we were thinking about families, parents with young kids, their focus is very different when they come into a museum. They might be interested, but they're just looking at their kids. They're making sure everyone stays where they're supposed to do, and other things related to the safety and well-being, and just having everyone in a space together. And kids just want to play. So this was a good example of something that we were able to convey a simple message and get people to read, but in a playful way. And actually, there's a little STEM content here too, because you are actually completing a circuit. And the other part of this that's really interesting is that you can see in these two photos, we have two people holding hands. So all you have to do is complete the circuit. So you could have one person with their hand on the metal piece on the left and another person on the metal piece on the right. But when they hold hands, they complete the circuit and then also act the light and revealing the message. So that was really nice to see too. So another activity that we did that turned out to be incredibly fun and especially popular with adults, it's called Release the Negative. So what we did is we set up situations, a table where you're writing your feelings, either something that happened to you that made you happy. That was one activity, but then Release the Negative was an activity where you wrote something on the paper that made you sad and was upsetting or concerning. But then we had the shredder right there. So you wrote down your negative, sad story or frustrations, and then you could shred the paper, which was incredibly satisfying. Some kids, frankly, would scribble and just wanted to shred, but that's okay too, because what ended up happening, they were spending so much time at the shredder. Adults and older kids wanted to come over and see what's going on too. And then we found that kids, 4 or 5 years old even, would start writing things, and parents and their adult caregivers would encourage them to write things down on the paper, and then you get to shred. So at first, even if the shredding was the activity that got them there, they were able to stay, figure out the rest of it, and then they did want to participate and complete the meaningful part of the experience of writing their negative feelings down, and then they got it. So we ended up taking this activity, it was so popular, and turning it into a simple pop-up. And you can see this is a like a $3 shredder from Office Max kind of thing. And it's anything. And that feeling of being able to write something down and do something with these feelings in a way that is constructive is not, it's a more controlled way of getting those angry feelings out, was really great. We also had some display walls where you could, we all took the shreds and they could be repurposed. So you can see we have this jar wall where we just took all the shreds and made a pretty display. But over time, we've done this many times, and different museums have come up with lots of creative ways to take the negative shreds and turn it into something positive. So that was the other nice thing about this activity, is it has a lot of next steps that are very open-ended. And that's something too that was able to be adapted really easily depending on the audience and the capacity of the different museums. And this is something, frankly, that families could do at home really easily too. Here's another example of another way you could do this activity where you're releasing the negative, where you can write your negative feelings on a piece of paper and then turn it into something beautiful, like a piece of origami. Here, it's a boat. So then you can actually take your origami boat and sail it away. So then this next experience is our response walls. I know a lot of people have seen response walls. So one thing we did is we set up the dichotomy, how someone been kind to you and what do you do when you feel mad. So we wanted to kind of create that two-part experience for the love and forgiveness exhibit, because we really wanted to marry and pair any positive, loving message with the harder forgiveness message. And for us, it was really interesting to discuss the forgiveness part, because it always came back to what's the catalyst? What happened that you need to be forgiven? And that was really a challenge for us to think about. How do we get to forgiveness without introducing a conflict? So that's where we relied a lot on words. When we were developing this, we talked about scenarios where you could kind of create a moment of conflict that causes a need to forgive, and in that scenario. But again, that was on that prescriptive path. But what we found too is once we were prototyping and giving families and kids space to in a scaffold, a structure, and tools to write these things down and express their own experiences, we didn't have to bring the conflict. Unfortunately, that's what childhood is about a lot of the times. It's about learning to share, how to manage your frustrations. So inevitably, families would come into the exhibit with a list of things that had just even happened that morning. So, or had happened in the recent past. And these are issues that you're always top of mind. So having these, this toolkit essentially to get these feelings out, we didn't really need to go very far to prompt a scenario to get to the forgiveness. So these were the questions that we posed. In the traveling exhibit, we leave this open-ended too for host venues to change the questions if they like. And that's really a useful tool, especially if they want to work with older children, teenagers, special programs, any other group that might they might be working with. So the activity that we're going to do today as a group is the infinity puzzle. So I'm going to take a minute and introduce this, or story puzzle. I'm sorry, I keep going back and forth. Our infinity story puzzle. So when we were developing Xoxo, we had a whole list of things and that had been prototyped, and we were moving along. And one of the things we do at the Children's Museum is we have these big charts where we kind of map out a spreadsheet about what an activity, what goals or what criteria the category the exhibit meets. And most of our exhibits, we want them to meet a lot of these categories of gross motor versus fine motor, or an age group, a learning goal. And as we were moving along in Xoxo, we realized we had a lot of things with writing, a lot of things that were kind of skewing a little bit older. So we wanted to make sure we had something really basic and could, and we had a lot of actually gross motor activities. So we wanted something that was more quiet and contemplative, but tangible, and something that geared more to preschool audiences. So we decided to build a puzzle, and you can see here our puzzle in the exhibit, and is a wooden puzzle. And these are some prototypes. We tested different things out, and the pieces ended up being around 3 to 5 inches in size and width and length. And we've made them out of wood. We've built them out of plastic, different, hardy materials that we could print on. But the idea of the puzzle was to introduce the vocabulary. So in all these other activities we had throughout the exhibit, we were talking about language and writing and doing all that stuff. But we realized, well, we need a place to just introduce the basic vocabulary. So we came up with this idea of a story puzzle. And these puzzle pieces are based on the Penrose puzzles that are known in the world. And the idea is that they're a few simple shapes that can be become infinity puzzles. They have no end. There's no wrong or right way, but there are just a couple of simple shapes that can be fit together so the puzzles can grow and grow and grow. So we took that idea and we ended up making a custom puzzle with 2 pieces. One piece is the larger piece that has the words on it, and then there's a skinny piece that is our filler that gives you a lot more variety to connect them. So the idea is that we would introduce the basic vocabulary, and we also, because of the age group and just thinking about how we all wanted to communicate, we also added a symbol or a drawing element. And then we created this simple pattern to help guide, help people put the puzzle together. And so it would kind of be cool looking and pretty once you started to put it together. So it was really popular. It was really successful. Actually, I'm going to go back. You can see we found this while we were initially thinking this was going to be for the preschool early ed kids and talking about vocabulary and being able to introduce the words and spelling and things like that. We actually found families and older people engaging with the puzzle and really getting into this storytelling aspect, where they would use the words as starters and pictures to then expand on a conversation they were having. And, or especially with some of these kids, you go over and see their puzzle and ask them about it. And then they tell you this amazing story that every word wasn't on the puzzle pieces, but in their mind, it really prompted this really great creativity and storytelling and pretend play. So we've really been excited about these puzzles. We've done this in the subsequent years. We've made these more versions for different organizations and started experimenting more and more with the idea of language, with symbols. The yellow puzzle here on the left, I think, of the screen, this was actually one we did for a community center where they had a really specific focus on self-esteem for their kids. So this was a vocabulary list and symbols that we worked with them to choose because this was language that they wanted to introduce. So for example, strong wasn't in our original love and forgiveness puzzle, but it was something that they wanted to convey. Courage, musical, artistic, again, thinking in heroic qualities they wanted to impart or with their kids or discussions they wanted to have with their kids. So again, there's the exciting thing about, or the interesting thing about this puzzle is that it really can become many, many things. This is a version we did when the exhibit went to a museum in Canada. where it was French first. So we translated everything into French and English, which was very fun. And then this is a new version that we've made that's actually a small retail version that the pieces are about half the size of this and of cardboard. And this is more focused on, it's a love and forgiveness and follows what we did in the traveling exhibit, but you can see we just switched up the colors and the design a little bit, but you can see the different configurations. The nice thing, one of the nice things about these puzzles too, is you can have the individual puzzles, but then individual puzzles can be joined together. So that's where there's really, from a utility point of view and talking about different ways to use these puzzle pieces, we can really, it's truly an infinity puzzle. It can really take on almost any kind of direction that that's warranted by the activity, by the group that you're with, or the story you want to tell. But we did find in from the exhibit point of view and the love and forgiveness point of view, this has been terrific because it's very scalable, it's very accessible, and the shapes are interesting, and there's that tangible quality that just brings people in. They want to touch it. They were curious. So kind of going back to this bigger idea of play and all the things that we've been doing at the Children's Museum when we explore these ideas of love and forgiveness and empathy and all these emotional topics, it really comes down to how we can use play as that entry point, because that's an equalizer. Everyone wants to have some kind of joy and playful moments in their lives. Also, with kids, when you're upset, sometimes, taking a break and playing is that catalyst for getting to that next step and talking about what just happened and your feelings. You can use play to kind of get to that, get over that hump or whatever that barrier is to communication. So what I'm looking at the time, what I'd like to do is I will pause here. And I thought this is where we could take a break and everyone could start making their own puzzles. But I also want to take a moment too and see if we wanted to, if there were any questions before we took a break to go make a puzzle. I was thinking we could reconvene at 1, but before we do that, I wanted to just take a moment to see if anybody had any questions specifically about the exhibit, Xoxo, or the puzzle, or what we're going to do moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. And what a delight to hear your story about this very engaging exhibit and the concept and the outcomes. I know some of our colleagues in the audience are museum professionals and working actively on ways to engage audiences in more reflective activities. Micah, for example, I know that you've done some tremendous work at your institution. I wonder if you have any reflections on what Anne shared here.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I really just am so impressed by how sort of thoughtful your development approach was, Anne, and I think you've been meeting with some of my team to talk about the possibility of even bringing a version of the exhibit to the Museum of Us. So I was really interested in seeing kind of it for myself, and it wasn't what I expected. I didn't really know much about it, and kind of the approach you took, just so thoughtful. The thing that kind of kept going through my mind was sort of the population, and I love that it was it was designed for young children, but also something that is really appeals to the adults in all sorts of ways. And I think you did a really nice job of finding those activities that sort of speak to both communities. In our museum, we really try to kind of focus on the aspect of, in order to get to to love, and in order to get to empathy, and to sort of go through this process of forgiveness and healing, we have to start with truth telling, and really sort of accountability for the painful, difficult kinds of things. And I found myself really sort of, you know, with our museum, do we try to be something to all people and include spaces for young children, where truth telling has a different kind of a role than, you know, ages 12, 13 and up, high school and college and adult. And so that was sort of the main thing going through my mind, just in full transparency, sort of like, you know, better to just be really good at what you can be for folks in your demographic, and let others do well in the spaces like the work the Children's Museum does, or is it really important to sort of begin, and I know it's really important to begin level setting early on and developing these kinds of ideas. But I would be interested in sort of that idea. Yeah, like how do you, with that demographic, you know, kind of go into the realm of truth telling as an important and critical component of kind of the larger, even if it's just the messed up things adults do that we can't hold kids accountable for. These are difficult lessons to learn in life, right? When you're that young, and you know, there are others who are experts in these spaces. So anyway, those are just some of my thoughts.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. We've talked more, especially, like I said, we developed this in 2014, and the world was a completely different place. And even the lens through which we developed Xoxo was very different. It was more like the fundamental of being a good person, what is love and forgiveness. And yeah, a lot of traumatic things have happened in the world in the last 3 years. We actually had an experience here in Pittsburgh. There was a mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. And we actually used this, we redeployed Xoxo. We literally brought it out in, it wasn't physically here, but we took the shredder. We makeshifted and cobbled together a lot of the elements here and put it up immediately that weekend as a way to give parents an entry point, a tool. And that's one of the things too, thinking about the Museum of Us or other more adult focused museums or spaces that can go deeper. I will advocate for these tangible hands-on experiences too, as a balance, because it's almost, you know, we talk a lot lately about self-care, and adults, I think we'll all agree, we're not that different than our child selves, our own selves when we were kids. We're adults, and children are actually emotionally not that different. And in a lot of ways, children are much more in tune with their feelings because they're right there on the surface. They want to know, they're asking questions. And then it's all the stuff, you grow up and somehow we forget and we revert, and we actually kind of lose that connection in a lot of ways. I think we step backwards because of the pressure and stress and all these other things. So having things like a puzzle or these shredders or in an adult exhibit or a traditional exhibit that might actually go much, much deeper into much more sophisticated and complex problems or topics could be a way to get people that really don't even want to acknowledge. I mean, we talk about that a lot these days, about there's the kind of denial of problems that exist or pretending that's not me and not making that connection to themselves or personalizing it. And these kind of childlike games can be a way to get people to connect without them realizing it and kind of let their guard down. I think that's the other part about when we think about playful experiences for adults. It's that icebreaker that, you know, again, I hate that term icebreaker. We use a lot for it, like corporate PD stuff, but it's giving somebody an opportunity to relax. And if they're more relaxed, they might be more open to learning something new. And the other thing about this too is that we do think about the adult and the child dynamic, that we really need adults to be, all adults to take on the responsibility as role models, because children are mimicking and modeling all adult behavior, not just their parents, but all adult behavior they see. So having these opportunities to relearn or to get adults to understand that responsibility and to model can be something that museums do. And it could be this kind of, maybe these more playful experiences in museums. Maybe museums can take on that role and remind all adults that they're role models in how they behave. So yeah, that's great. I'm a great admirer of your museum too. And I have to say, your shift to the new name even was such a big and bold and important choice. So
agreed, Anne. Aparna, I see you nodding your head quite a bit here as Anne and Micah are engaging. I wonder what you're thinking right now.
No, actually, I would like to bring my 2-year-old son who's with me right now. And
Hi.
can I come in?
Hi.
You have to be here so everybody can see you. He's like, he wants to say hi, but he feels shy to come on screen. No, I've been, especially at this age, kids go through a lot of emotional development. And, I've been, oh, you want to say something? Say hi.
Hi.
So, yeah, see, everybody's waving to you.
Boo.
Oh, yes, that's your
Run.
Oh, thank you so much, Mika. Yeah, so, I've been curious as a parent to learn about socio-emotional learning at his stage. And, been and I totally agree with what Anne just said about, adults being role models, because sometimes we just say some things between me and my husband, and then the kid just uses it in a context, and he's like a sponge absorbing everything. So I totally, I could resonate with the conversation that was just happening here. Yeah. And I'm just still wondering, how I could teach mindfulness practices at this stage of life, for a kid who can talk a bit, but not yet read or write so much. And if there are any strategies or any tools to you could suggest, I would be really grateful.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've been doing more with, especially with we're doing some research on kindness in early childhood, actually with infants. The Fred Rogers Center in Latrobe, Pennsylvania is doing some really interesting work called Simple Interactions. And it really is for adults to be aware that every simple moment is, and something that, especially as we get older and busier, we take for granted the small moments we have to impart and to imprint so really good, positive social emotional learning practices. And it's about facial expressions. It's about taking a moment and even acknowledging, like what you just did with your son. You acknowledge that he was there. You're busy. You're in a work meeting. No, he's welcome, took the time. We all took that moment to say hello. Those are those small moments too that are really, really significant, because it begins to, like you said, the children are learning constantly. So it's that pattern of mom gets mad when she's worried and pushes me away. No, or yells at me, or, don't bother me now, I'm too busy, or go play with your toys. And those small little things versus us just taking that, a 10 count and giving him what he needs in that moment. And then he's already bored. He's moving on because we're bored. So, those are the kind of things too. And one thing I think what I'll do is in the break, I will find the link to the Simple Interactions work, because that's really, really fascinating. And I think everyone here would really enjoy learning more about. I keep looking up because I have a poster on my wall. They have an amazing toolkit and I'd be happy to share that. And they're doing stuff for kids. It's the early childhood. It's 10 and 2 years old and under, right before, like you were saying, before they get really language and language skills. So I'll be happy to share that.
Great, thanks, Anne. So why don't we take a break? And do you think, what, about 10, 15 minutes, or what works
yeah,
for
let's
you?
give everyone a chance if they want to drink, use the bathroom. Let's come back at 1:15.
Great, thank you all for joining us. And Anne, of course, thank you for helping set the stage for a terrific discussion. We'll see you all back here at 1:15. So just about 15 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an opportunity to take a small break, and here we are reconvened. I know that before we get started with turn it back over to you, Anne, I believe, Sarah, you had your hand raised and you wanted to share something with us. Are you with us again? Well, we'll see.
She may have just raised her hand to mention the comments that she left, the resources that she left in the chat. You can ask
Indeed.
her if she's back.
Great, great. And before we get started, just to point out Sarah's resources that she did paste into the chat box about Harvard Center for the Developing Child, which I think complement your resources nicely, Anne. So Sarah, thank you. And Anne, let's turn it back over to you.
Okay, so this is the first time I've done this in this way, so I'm glad we have this size group because we can experiment. But what I thought we would do is we could share, if you've made a puzzle and you'd like to share, we could try that. Either if you want to take, this is where it's like on Zoom, we want to kind of imagine if we were all together in a room. I was thinking about this for future, that we were going to have the puzzles on everyone's table and we'd go around and then join them together. But I think for today, if you have a puzzle and you could take a snapshot and like to share, I think that would be terrific, that you could, we could either post it in the chat, or if you wanted to share your screen or send it to me and we could share your screen that way. The other exercise as part of this that we'd like to do is if you want to add vocabulary words and words and ideas for symbols in the chat. I have a Word document that I'd love to compile an expanded vocabulary list for these story puzzles that I'll share with this group too. But again, this idea of developing this idea of the story puzzle as a tool beyond what we've done at the museum as an interactive play exhibit with big play pieces, how we could think about this in other contexts for older people, for other museums, but even for professional development activities, for K through 12, for university, for other learning opportunities. I also have my Illustrator file open, that if we wanted to do a live, make a live puzzle together, I will share my screen and we can call out words and symbol ideas and play with the colors and make a puzzle together as we do the discussion. So I'm happy to do that too. So before, I'd love to share my screen and you guys will see my documents, and then we could keep chatting about some of these ideas. And if we wanted to go around and someone wanted to volunteer to share their puzzle, does that sound like an idea? Or Ela, if you want to start?
Sure. And before we do that, I want to just jump in here very quick. And Sarah, welcome back. I know that you had your hand raised before we went on break, and then we also saw that you posted some resources in the chat box. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? You're good? Okay, excellent, excellent. And then, Anne, I just wanted to revisit a question that came into the chat box before break, and that was, what are the directions? And I remember you said that you had minimal directions in this puzzle activity in the exhibit. So how do you, what are the directions?
Right, so I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at the puzzle. So actually, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint and go back to that slide. So in the exhibit, we actually don't have any directions. There are, we have a prompt that talks about storytelling and language and how storytelling is a good way to share your feelings, both good and bad, or not good and bad. That is an old habit. No feelings are good or bad. They're happy and or sad, or it's how you make. But all feelings are part of us and welcome. So that's a rewind there. But literally, we had no directions. But the idea for us is, you put the two pieces, you start assembling the pieces together, and it's kind of this free-form association. You can decide to do things that are alike. You can do words that are different. You can, frankly, when we developed the puzzle, the lines themselves, the curves were the cues. So most people start by making a pattern. And then once they see the pattern, and that, again, that entry point for all ages and unfacilitated experience. And that's the other thing I do want to talk about with this group too, is these experiences as facilitated versus unfacilitated. In the context of when this was developed, it was completely unfacilitated. We're going to assume there's no gallery attendant. There's just a kid who's approaching this puzzle. But it's just about, that's where we have these three or these different four different lines on the puzzles, because it's just about pattern matching and aligning. And that's something very young children can do and get. And once they see that you've made a puzzle and then you see the words, it's like, oh, okay, now I can start making some different choices. I can start engaging in some storytelling and some basic reading. So that's where how this puzzle started, but that there are no directions in beyond that. And then again, when we did this, it was in the full context of the exhibition, where a lot of the language or the language and symbols on these puzzle pieces were reinforced and repeated in other places. So again, that level of minimal instruction made a lot of sense in context. So that's the other thing with this group that would be very interesting to think about, is how we could use a puzzle tool like this in a different context, when there isn't an exhibit in the room to support all of the information to reference the words aren't repeated everywhere, or the symbols. So that's one of the things too that I think is a really interesting point of discussion, is what kind of instructions would we need? Do you need, in terms of language, is the vocabulary words, single words not enough? Would we add phrases to some of these puzzle pieces to begin to complete those thoughts? Is that necessary? The other big question we're looking at is that layer of facilitation and what's needed, and what type of training, even somebody who's going to facilitate, let's say, in a really informal learning setting like a museum, what kind of specialized training would you need to facilitate a meaningful outcome or a meaningful discussion about emotions, about love and forgiveness, in a way that you might only have 5 minutes, you might only have 10 minutes with somebody, versus doing a full workshop from beginning, middle to end, that in a classroom setting, for example, where you might be able to use these puzzle pieces. One new project that I'm very excited about, that we're about to start, is using these puzzle pieces, using these puzzles with a local children's hospital behavioral health clinic. and they want to use these puzzle pieces as part of their outpatient therapy, where they start the therapist will start using the puzzles with the families in therapy and then let them take their puzzles home to continue the work. So again, that way, what kind of language or what kind of prompts, images, is color a big factor in these emotional puzzles, because we know people associate color with emotions. So I'd love to hear from you all and get some feedback. If you want to share some potential vocabulary words that I could start literally making a puzzle together. Yes, Elif.
Yes, thank you. This is very exciting. And although I didn't complete a puzzle myself, I was just thinking about, what other contexts this exercise can be useful. And one of the things that came to my mind is perhaps for adults, framing the exercise around a question about a really sort of like deep and meaningful question that everyone asks, but we don't normally like, and rarely acknowledges perhaps. And this could be, so that's one thing, that around the question. And then when I say like what kind of questions there could be, just thinking for our context, for example, this, designing for empathy workshops, the 3 previous workshops that we had, I started taking notes to myself about, like these like one single questions that I will definitely take away with me after the summit, that I will keep thinking about them. And one of them was what needs remedy? And this came up in the Black Lives Matter, strategies for teaching Black Lives Matter. It just jumped at me, and I just cannot forget that statement. What needs remedy? And it could be many things. You can make it, anything really. But it could be our, our humanity, our environment, ourselves, our own trauma, or healing after surgery. It could be anything. And the other question was this question that's often posed by Zorana Ivsevic is, what do you need to know another? How do we know when we say we know another person? I know you. What makes you say that? Like, what is it that you know that makes you say that you know the other person? And that's, I think, like really, to me, like those are the questions that keep me up at night, literally. And these may be, I mean, I'm just sharing out loud, basically. And so things like that might be interesting. And then in Jago's exercise yesterday, there was this emphasis on how our cultural lens affects the way we see empathy or we empathize, our ability to empathize. What is that cultural lens? What are some of the, so within these questions, I'm thinking, what could be some of the vocabulary? I really love that idea that you start with introducing some simple vocabulary. I think that's really useful to anchor it, but it may not be, it depends on the group also. But what would be some of the vocabulary that we would introduce to even like start unwrapping, some of these concepts? Or do we need any words? We can just maybe leave it out like that, and maybe match them with some images of how we see, for example, looking in the mirror or something sort of like metaphorical images, where people maybe can pair with, what do you need to know the other? But then that image is actually literally looking in the mirror to yourself. What does that mean? And in another context, I was thinking, this could be really fun exercise around an artwork, a specific artwork, just encouraging us to look at the artwork from completely different perspectives. So this is not about an art history session. We don't really need to know. I mean, we are seeing the object. Imagine that you're in the presence of the object. So it's not so much, how it was made, who made it, or how much is it worth, or anything like that. But what kind of terminologies that we can use to spark that kind of knowledge of how can we use this space and this encounter with this unknown object to start a dialogue. It could be like a conversation starter. And I was also thinking, that our friends at the Seattle Aquarium, they'll have that, Empathy for Wildlife Challenge. It could be around the animal. It could be around the, any other creature, or a plant. And again, that question, what do you need to know the other? And in that case, I know that, some zoos and aquariums, they started naming those animals to make them more personal. So let's say I'm forgetting, but let's say Harry the otter, what do you need to know to get to know Harry a little better, and then maybe introduce some, vocabulary and get people to think, really like what it takes. And because it takes an effort. And I think just puts us on a sort of a contemplative way that where we are paying attention actually is like what we are doing. And it takes intention and attention to empathize, to get to know the other. That's like the minimum. And then, for example, I was thinking, what are some of the vocabulary that I would introduce? Let's say, if you were looking at a hermit crab, that really doesn't even look like us, it's just, somebody might just call it a bug, like this creature that we know very little about. But if it has a name and we sort of like personalize it as if like he, she, it works our attention, I would like to know what would make him feel angry, what would make him feel safe, what would make him feel loved. And I know these are human concepts perhaps, but is there an analog in their world for love? What does love look to a hermit crab? Is it just safety? Is it a rock, that he can crawl under, or a beautiful shell that he perfectly fits? What makes him secure? What makes him happy? What makes him sad? What surprises him? What makes him not hungry? And I'm thinking, we can almost like use these for getting to know just any other person or anything, as a matter of fact. And final idea is I really love the bilingual aspect of the puzzle. And I think it also could be used again even in a zoo and aquarium or in an artwork by pairing English with the local context. What this animal would be called in their local, native language from that, territory, for example. And trying to encourage us to look at this particular being from another's perspective. How did they give meaning to it? Why did that call him that and not something else? Why do we call him what we call him? So I think these are, it's just like, it's really infinite puzzle, it can go on.
It really is. And the other part of this that's really kind of interesting, because you're absolutely right. That's where, I'm sometimes really glib where we don't have instructions. We actually had 2 leading questions in the exhibit. How has someone been kind to you? And what do you do when you feel mad? And those questions were printed and posted large in several places. So that actually was the context for this in the exhibit. But I think what I get excited about now, thinking more and more about this, and it's just been the last year and a half maybe that we've looked at the story puzzle as an isolated, as a standalone or a breakout experience. It's you have your puzzle, you can pose a question about the hermit crab or an animal, and then someone else might have the same question about the koala bear and about another thing. And then everyone can bring their puzzles together, and then you see these commonalities. So when I think about using the San Diego Zoo or the animal analogy, then you can begin to see how all the ecosystem and how being kind, or we talk a lot, I know very little about this, but I know in Pittsburgh and lots of places, we're talking a lot about bees and how bee colonies are disappearing and how devastating that is. But it's that interconnected part of it. So that could be really interesting too, when we talk about animals, how everyone's reliant on the other and you might not even see it. So what comfort and what we need to make the bees safe and well, then how that affects the birds and the other, and it goes on and on and on, you guys. But that's what I love about these puzzle pieces and doing them in person or with groups, is that it can go on and on forever. There is, and it's so simple. You can, even if you have as an exercise, I'm thinking for us, the practicality is you print them and you have something that's facilitated and guided, but then frankly, you turn it over, and that's how we imagine it, especially with kids. You have these pieces. How are you going to put them together? And seeing that kind of, it even gets more infinite when you think about the blank. So I did see also some questions in the chat here. So yeah, Sarah, that was the idea with the PDFs, that you can cut out the pieces and kind of start assembling them yourselves. So maybe we can just lead a discussion if you all stop sharing. Michelle, did you want to share what you were talking about in terms of the trying this to get healthcare workers?
So we've been working with our local healthcare system to try and get them out into nature, and to sort of on a natural healing concept. And it seems like this whole idea with all of these different words would seem like a really great way to sort of start that process, or to get, we've got what we call a peace garden in our outdoor facility, but everything that we do has to be very, very hardy. So I'm just wondering if, there is, I feel like there would be a macro version of this that was almost like a labyrinth or something that you could kind of walk on and then add your piece to it, or something in some big way that would work with healthcare workers or anybody. We've just been through this very, very stressful collective experience of COVID, and we're trying to think of ways to start healing and to use our natural resources that we have at the Raptor Center to facilitate that healing. So this is a really interesting idea.
Yeah, that's a great point of scale. Thinking about scale, because I know even when we first did this, it's a good size. It's just big enough to not walk off. We've gone and done a smaller size, more traditional puzzle size for at-home use. But I love that idea of like even really big, these like in a sensory garden or a sensory, the sensory paths, that kind of exploration kind of experience is really interesting. So maybe as we look at about 20 minutes left, I'm going to share my screen again, and then it would be to help us or love to try to see if we can make a collective puzzle today, or if we wanted to kind of throw out some more words, or as part of this exercise, do we want to pose a question? Maybe one of the questions that Elif suggested, like this idea of what do you need to know another person? Is that maybe for this exercise, do we want to start throwing out some vocabulary words, and we can kind of make a puzzle based on that question? That's something we feel makes sense? Or we want to try for 5 minutes or so, and then we could come back for a discussion?
May I share with you just like a visual, I don't know if you can see this, but you know, like what would you need to know another? And I mean, and I'm that kind of person that I like patterns. So I had to like
Mhm.
create a circle instead of just going. But I can imagine this, and if we asked everyone to create their own circle, use maybe only 5 of these to make one of these, but then what you suggested, let's bring them together and create create this beautiful infinite pattern of all the ways we can know another, and how different it is for each one of us to approach the other, and then talk about it. What made you do that, and how do you think? And then there will be, I think, those moments of people will say, well, don't you think, like happiness is the same thing as something, love. And then you can unfold, what does happiness mean? What does love mean to you? What did you really mean by using that word?
I think that is a great, I'm really interested in that question. So trying to think. Does anyone else, do we want to take another just few minutes to assemble your puzzles, or does anyone have another way they looked at these puzzle pieces that maybe we haven't talked about, or in that break, did they do something else that they would like to share? Okay. Maybe one thing we could do here is, let's see here. Share my screen again. I'll share the puzzle. And if anybody wants to kind of call out some vocabulary words, or some words, even make some suggestions on symbols, I won't be able to do that as quickly. I'm also curious to hear about color choices. These colors on the screen happen to be something where the colors for the last project we were working, the organization I was working with, these were their colors that they wanted. But the emotional attachment or emotional association with colors too is a factor. So if anybody has some suggestions in that, when we think about puzzles like this as the visual effect of the total experience, and how impactful that is, or how important that is, or is a black and white and removing that layer to make it, is that something too that is worth the experiment, that we really focus on the storytelling, and since color is very subjective, how that might, and color is very contextual and associated with different cultures, and how that could be a factor.
And I have a suggestion, not based out of colors and emotions, but I'm just thinking of people who might be looking at this with the condition of red-green color blindness. So I'm just thinking of, what are the appropriate colors for them to even be able to appreciate the color differences. So if we, could use like a CMYK sort of a color scheme, and then be able to come up with appropriate colors.
Yeah. I'm looking for my swatches, which I'm not getting right now. Let's see here. I know when we designed Xoxo, we really thought about color a lot, and I'm going to go to the purple. We chose purple as the dominant color because it was evocative of love, but it wasn't red and stereotypical. And it's funny how purple became a neutral in that, and blue was associated with sadness. So it was kind of this in between, red and that connotation of love and sadness with blue. We ended up in the purple range as the dominant color. I don't know how people feel about that in our love and forgiveness language, with purple being a dominant color, if that was appropriate, or is that or are there other suggestions in that realm too? I'm not sure if I'm seeing a chat, if anybody, oh, here we go. Let me see. Yes, does anyone have actually a puzzle that's already completed that we could share, or they want to share?
I think to me, it could even be a list of words,
Mhm.
around the circle. So don't worry about the cutting the pieces. It's there quite a
Yeah.
lot. It takes time, but it could be just a circle or a flower pattern or whatever. Just draw it with your hands. And the idea is, how the thought process, what it inspires, right?
I know when we started thinking about this and how to do this via Zoom, it sounded like a fun idea to do a live puzzle, but maybe it's, this idea of just, I'd love to kind of expand our vocabulary list. So if anybody would want to type some potential words in the chat, one thing I can do, because obviously we're continuing to work on this. We're going to do this session again on Monday, but also just with the conference and the seminar, I could take some of, and you could send them to me after another time. But if anybody had some words and questions, ideas, I could assemble a puzzle and share out at a later date too. It's kind of a follow-up to this, because I think some of, especially what you were saying about, thinking about this in different contexts, I think is a really interesting thing, and really kind of going back to how we started and what we do at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, and how we really kind of come back to play, and what we do. One thing that I'd like to impart to everyone, and working with this group over the years has been able to do, and it's been really interesting, is to convey that when you design experiences for children, they're not necessarily childlike, and that's when we kind of go into these ideas, that it's really we're kind of amusing ourselves as the adults and the designers, but that you can really translate these experiences for adults, but you're not necessarily doing it like that differently. You can, in this puzzle piece, is that example, just making some age appropriate, developmentally appropriate shifts, but the fundamental experience is the same. And that when you're designing experiences for children, they're a lot more sophisticated than some people can give them credit for. But likewise, when you're designing, when you have a solid experience that works for kids, try it with adults, because you might really expand an opportunity there and get adults to engage with an exhibit or an experience in a really different way, just by kind of getting them to relax a little bit.
And may I say something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just noticed Paul put his list, and maybe, if you think that might be helpful, we can let's see. And if, I mean, this is going to take longer time, and this is an experimental thing that we are doing. So that's, we don't really need to have a finished product in any of the sessions. Right. That's why we are designing for empathy. These are all new approaches that we are creating together. So we are not coming here with prescriptions. And and I would love to, I mean, my personal curiosity, I would love to ask Paul, what made him come up with those words, for example?
Sure, yeah. Just going off of what you had done with yours, I was just looking through the words because I cut them out earlier during them, so I have them in front of me. And with the question of how do we know another, I was focusing a lot of like listening and being able to communicate and understand someone by sharing your own experiences as well. So that's why I did listen, share, also knowing another, the similarities and the things that are alike between you and another, I think can lead to understanding them, because then you know what is different between you and another. So that's why I chose alike. And then patience as well, because it takes time to know another. But another thing that I wanted to mention, as I was kind of just putting things together originally, I kind of followed what Anne was saying that many people did in the exhibit, in that I just kind of started placing things together without any intent. And then when I started noticing the words that were next to each other, I would find other words to go off of that. And a big part that I noticed myself doing with the pattern was the like dark blue, since it's a thicker band, stood out to me more. So when I was making the pattern with the dark blue, I noticed the lighter blue, which is thinner, and I kind of expanded off of those words, almost like dialing in and focusing by using those kind of lighter blue. So like with the 5 circle that I have now, I was just thinking of the lighter blue, which ones would go off of some of these. And like with share, I was looking at like the feelings one and the respect. They could go off of that using the light blue. So I really like this idea and all the different ways that it can connect and it can lead to conversation. And I'm from the Seattle Aquarium. So when Elif was talking about the like animals and how to make observations about them, that is exactly right up my alley. We do something that's modified from museums, which is visual thinking strategies, VTS, which is a way to look at something and just make observations. And I really enjoyed doing that with animals as well, and just seeing what people think about an animal without giving them any knowledge about it. So I really like this tool, and I could see using it in that kind of context of like, here is a nudibranch, which is an animal that lots of people don't know too much about. That's like a little sea slug that's gorgeous, and there's so many different species. But just like looking at something that you don't know anything about and building a puzzle of how you feel about it. Those are just some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Paul.
I love what you said, the notice and accidental. Those are 2 words too, that it's that happenstance, those happy accidents, that sometimes when something's surprising, it kind of also sticks and becomes memorable too. And I think a lot of all of this work that we want to do is we want to surprise people and get people to start thinking about things in different ways, and sometimes shock them or surprise them. So love that.
Yeah, and this is Lottie here. I'm sorry, I can't be in any of the chat or anything. I'm on a phone, so my apologies. But I found this discussion really quite moving, actually. And I was thinking about when we teach our students about educational theory and human development, I was thinking about some of the theorists and how they really recognize the sophistication of children, and how what you said about, designing something for children is really tough, but it can bridge with adults. And when adults can see that children have this kind of depth to them, it's I think it's powerful for that to happen. I did my own map here with some words, and I actually chose where does forgiveness come from as kind of my theme, because you talked about forgiveness as one of the points, and it's a very difficult process to do this. It feels very vulnerable. And I'll just share some of the words that I came up with. I can't put them in the chat, unfortunately, but in terms of, forgiveness, I put in willingness, unwillingness, self and other knowledge, vulnerability, fear, anger, and then a bridge. And so it was like an exploration of my own thinking about what forgiveness is. And I imagine that I could get further with other people doing the same thing, and joining together, as you say, that collaborative experience. So I'm really just riffing on this idea of children's deep sophistication, and because of your creation for those children, I'm getting depth in my own learning. So thank you.
Lottie, would you mind sharing your words again with us?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I did it around kind of where does forgiveness come from, or forgiveness, and they were willingness, naivete, vulnerability, self and other knowledge, fear, anger, unwillingness, and then a bridge, like bridging.
Thank you, Lottie.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. That was I'm kind of taken aback by these new ideas, especially this the idea of the question. I think that's really a great way to use this puzzle and put it into that context, because that's one of the things, again, we've been talking, or I've been thinking about so much. It's when we take certain things like this out of the context of the full project, or without a facilitator. And I think just having a simple question presented is it. It's a wonderful way to do it. And then frankly, that gets back to the whole intent of projects like this, is that it's responsive to the audience or the person that's working with this. And it's adaptable, and frankly, something like this, it's that sustainability aspect, because there are infinite numbers of ways to put this puzzle pieces together, because there are infinite numbers of questions, and kids, I mean, that goes back, I will always wrap it back to the work we do at the Children's Museum, and kids are always questioning. And when we think about ourselves as people who work for and on behalf of children and with children, we're lifelong learners. And what is learning? It's about questioning the world you're in. So I love that idea of kind of anchoring the infinity story puzzle, not so much in the finished story, but in the question from the start. So I'm going to thank everybody for leaving me with that. And then as I look at the time, I can't believe this 2 hours went by so quickly for me. I'm actually going to adapt what you all helped me with today to the session on Monday when we do it again. And I think we're going to pose some questions or put it into that context when we take that break with the group on Monday. So
thank you, Anne. I was just going to say
yeah.
the very same thing, to be able to take this experience from today's workshop and apply it to Mondays. And perhaps some of you in the audience today will join us again on Monday, as you've had a couple of days to reflect and think and maybe process what we've talked about today. So thank all of you for being a part of our workshop today. And of course, Anne, thank you for introducing this to us and helping us think more deeply and really moving us. Folks, you'll see in the chat box, we have put a survey link. We would love to get your feedback. So please take a moment to share your thoughts about this particular workshop. We pay attention to all of this. And we'll see you, hopefully, many of you, in our next workshop, in our series of workshops tomorrow. Yes, Elif.
Yes, and I also would like to thank everyone and thank Anne for leading us in this workshop. And this is like so exciting to me that these workshops are underway. that this is happening. This is exactly why we're doing this, to experiment and to learn, to adapt and change. So there's really no prescription for this. It will look different in each context. But the more we try, the more we feel, put ourselves in a vulnerable position that we are really not, there's no expertise in here, like we are trying to create this. I mean, we are experts in different areas, but when we come together, something else happens. And this just gives me so much hope. So, and just a little note also, I mean, this is these, summits and workshops, they're not just like a one-time event. If anybody is interested in, we can form small groups, like working groups. We can still continue talking about these ideas in small groups. And then maybe next time when we meet at the summit again next year, we'll provide, like, hey, this is what we learned, this is what we did over the year, and this is what we have learned. So that's what this is for. Thank you so much for being here, Greg. Thank you so much for facilitating, and Anne for presenting, and everybody for participating. See you tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.